And Dr. David Ubilava, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Sydney, joins us for more this morning. Dr. Ubilava, let's first talk about what this means for importing countries of this rice, especially as those already struggling with supplies as it is, and which countries are likely to be hardest hit?
Hi, thanks for having me. So whenever the large exporter of a commodity, such as India is for rice, stops exporting, that's the considerable share of commodity removed from the market. And immediately that means shortage of the commodity and higher prices. So the countries that rely on imports from India will be affected. And then you listed a few. In other countries are Bangladesh and Saudi Arabia that are major importers of Indian rice. And so they will have to find alternative sources. And on your graphic, you showed Thailand and Vietnam are likely to be the next likely countries from where those countries will try to import rice from. But global prices will increase regardless, so because there will be less of the rice out there to be shared.
Let's go to details about regarding what you just talked about. So Thailand and Vietnam, as our graphics showed, would likely step in India's place. But is it enough? Do they have enough supplies to be the dominant player that India has been when it comes to the export of rice?
Yeah, so it's the short answer is no, and that's what it would translate into increased prices. So effectively, any shortage of availability of rice will be translated into higher prices, so that like overall there is an equilibrium of sorts, whereas suppliers are selling what they're supplying and buyers are buying, but price will be higher. And rice is a major staple. And so it's not by accident that the countries that you mentioned early on, those are relatively low and middle income countries. And so when the price of key staple goes up, that just makes people's lives worse because we are already seeing worldwide inflationary pressures. In fact, it's one of the reasons why India has imposed this ban. And so for people within India, that's good news. But for people outside of India, that's bad news because the main staple will become more expensive, and therefore that will impact people at the verge of poverty a lot more.
Well, this couldn't have come at a worse time because we're also dealing with the impact of El Nino hitting, the supply of crops and the Black Sea grain deal. And so you talked a lot about prices going up for these staples. What are, of course, then the risks to inflation, and how do you expect this to worsen the current inflationary situation that many countries around the world are grappling with?
Yeah, that's a great point. And exactly, we are sort of witnessing a bit of a perfect storm in the sense that there is this policy intervention here, which happens to coincide with another political issue in the Black Sea region that mostly affects wheat, which is another major staple. And then we also have this developing El Nino, which tend to impact India and other Southeast Asian rice-producing countries. And in fact, I would not be surprised to assume that one of the reasons why this policy intervention was introduced was because of developing El Nino and possibility it may have on local rice production. And so if everything manifests itself, then those other countries that we mentioned earlier, other rice exporters, will not be able to cover as much of the shortage in the rice exports due to this ban as they would otherwise. It's still too early to tell whether El Nino will develop and whether it will result in yield reduction at the levels that we've observed during previous El Nino episodes. But if that were to happen, there will be both rice availability issues as well as rice affordability issues. The last time that price of rice increased dramatically was in 2008, and at that time price increase was quite dramatic. I don't anticipate it to be as large. We're talking about 200 or 300% increase, but I also think that price increase will be larger than what we saw last year. That is, it will be more than 5 or 10%.
Well, Dr. Ubilava, we appreciate you coming on. That was David Ubilava, there, Associate Professor of Economics at the University of Sydney.